the mindset of being able to articulate that and distill that down into solutions, whether that's data oriented or otherwise, is very much a quality that I look for when I go to hire.
Now it's 10 o'clock here in Taiwan. So let me introduce myself and also my TDAO, and then we will welcome our speaker today. So, hi everyone, I'm Anthea. I'm the account specialist at MyTDAO, and I will be the host for today's event. So, we are about to begin, so it's very wonderful to meet all of you here. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and I hope this X-Space interview provides inspiration for your career paths. I'd also like to invite you to share your insights after the interview on X afterwards, and let's go grow together. So before I introduce our guest, I'd like to take a moment to give you a brief introduction about MyTDAO. Our core mission is to connect high-quality talents with opportunities in the Web3 industry. We bridge the gap between skilled professionals and physicians across the Web3 landscapes and offer the latest insights in this field. Today marks the second episode of our Inside Web3 Career series. We're thrilled to welcome Emily, Director of Data at MoonPay, with a strong background in data analytics and leadership. Emily brings a wealth of experience from her previous roles at companies like Coinbase, Uber, etc. And today she'll share her views on the role of data in the Web3 space. So, hi Emily, can you hear us? And would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, yes, definitely. Can you hear me? Yes, I think so. Great. Yes.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm currently, as Anthea said, the Director of Data at MoonPay, which, if you haven't heard of it, but I hope you have, is the leading Web3 infrastructure company. And we're best known for our Ramps products, which give people a decentralized solution for buying, selling, and trading digital assets. So that includes cryptocurrencies as well as various tokens and, of course, NFTs as well. As Anthea said as well, prior to MoonPay, I was in data science at Coinbase and marketing analytics at Uber, IKEA, and Dentsu Aegis, which is a digital or a marketing agency. Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for your introduction, Emily. And we are getting to know you a little bit more. So let's move on. And I'm interested in learning what's next. And I will have prepared some questions for you so that all the audience can know you more. So first of all, so consider you are moving from Uber, that is a well-known company that most of people knows, and now to the Coinbase, and also what were the key factors that drove this career transition?
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in new technologies, and I've had also the privilege of being able to have a pretty high tolerance for risk in my career. So, we know when I moved to IKEA, which is a extremely well-established company, to say the absolute least, to Uber, a lot of people at the time, and we have to think about, this was 2016, I think it was, when I joined Uber, and at the time it wasn't that big, right? It was emerging. People were seeing it as illegal even in a lot of places. And indeed it was, illegal in some places as well. So I always had this idea of wanting to, be part of the new thing. And I actually have to thank, a person who is very close to me, JD Millwood, who is the VP of Product and Data and Design at MoonPay currently. And he got me into crypto when we worked together at Uber, because honestly, I wasn't an early adopter by any means, but he was becoming the head of growth at Coinbase, and his passion and faith in crypto was enough to persuade me to move to Coinbase as well, even though it was the thick of the freezing crypto winter. So again, this was in 2018 now, so we're a couple of years later. And the market was, I think BTC was at around $2,000 at the time. So you can imagine, when back then it was crazy. People were saying Bitcoin is going to die, and people were asking why would I want to join an industry that seemed like it was only catering to the dark web and all these nefarious uses. Obviously, fast forward 7 years later and it's very different. So I'm very grateful to him. And what drew me in was actually the prospect of getting in exactly on the ground floor of something monumentous. I could feel at the time, that it was kind of like being part of the first mission to the moon or the creation of the internet. So the idea of contributing to life and world changing technology was really attractive to me at the time.
Yeah, I see. So thanks for that. And what's next would be like, what were the most significant challenges you encountered in adapting your data analysis skills and methodologies to the unique characteristics of the cryptocurrency market?
Yeah, I would say the initial transition wasn't too bad since I was in marketing science, and the foundational mechanisms of marketing science and marketing in general are pretty much the same regardless of the product you're dealing with, especially because even to this day, 7 years later, we're still dealing with Web 2 marketing, right? We really don't have Web 3 marketing per se. There's definitely niches of that, but it's very, very rare. So we're still doing marketing in Web 2. So, for example, marketing channel attribution modeling, determining ROI on marketing spend, experimentation like A/B testing, testing different creatives, measuring the effectiveness of email, or just marketing in general. Those are more or less the same as what I had been doing in my career previously. And so any methodology of descriptive analytics, especially, or understanding historical performance was pretty cut and dry. Where the challenges started to come from the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 were basically anything related to predictive analytics or modeling. And that's mainly because crypto markets they were and they still are pretty volatile. And especially, like I said, at the time in 2018, 2019 in the winter when Bitcoin was at 2000, I think Ethereum was like at 5, I don't remember, but it was very, very low, right? There was no sense of seasonality. So again, fast forward 7 years, and now we have this idea of like, okay, we can see that every year around Christmas time, for example, there tends to be a dip in the market because people are not interested in having those activities. But again, back then I had nothing to work with. So when we're talking about how, like our performance of the company is based on market, it was extremely difficult to understand. So something like, a lifetime value model. So this is something I helped build at Coinbase, and crypto products, they're not typical retail products, nor are they typical financial products. They're very much in a category of their entirely on their own. And so calculating something like, LTV is very hard because the typical way you would do that is average revenue, some idea of average revenue per user combined with average retention rate, recency, frequency, that kind of thing. But how do you account for either or any of those factors when both fluctuate or all of them fluctuate wildly depending on market conditions? So for creating various predictive models, I had to get really creative with both the framing of the problem and the methodologies that I applied for the solution. I also had to get very comfortable, and this is still true to this day, but I had to get very comfortable with uncertainty. There's always, of course, when you work with data, a degree of uncertainty. Nothing's perfect. All models are just models. They're not, you don't only know what happened until it actually happened, for sure. However, in crypto, it was even more so, right? So I had to shift my mindset to solving problems in the short term while being fully aware that one, they might not be correct in the long run. And also they might not even solve the problem in the long run, or the problem is going to change on over and over again, as we have seen in the crypto industry. So I had to get away from all these perfectionist tendencies that I might have had. There's actually really no way to be married to any of the methodologies or solutions when everything moves so fast and is also unprecedented.
That sounds interesting. So you mentioned about that was you as a transition from the certainty to uncertainty, you need to test a lot of methodology to see whether they can fit in the cryptocurrency or fit in this kind of field. So and you also mentioned about there is a mindset. So I'm just curious, how was that mindset influence you or mindset influence that you can transition from the certainty to into a very uncertain field. So that was a follow-up question. So would you like to give me some examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of it has to do with well, forecasting exactly how well your business is going to do, right? In a typical e-commerce situation, for example, and especially if you're a long-standing e-commerce company such as Amazon, or you can name a number of them, right? Is that you know in the past how your users behaved, how your stock was moving, not your stock as in your financial stock, but your actual stock of your supply, right? What supply looked like, what demand looked like. And I had to get away from all of that to understand that supply and demand are in flux. And it was actually almost even philosophical to some extent, right? You kind of have to understand, okay, let me get away from pretty much everything that I've kind of constantly, that I've been taught and that I know, and reframe almost literally everything into this new world in which I have to almost just go with intuition, which is pretty ironic as a data practitioner, because it is not within a data practitioner's sort of intuition, nature to kind of go with the flow and just kind of think on, on gut feeling. Like that is the purpose of data in the first place, right? In most companies is to not go on gut feeling, is to validate some of these gut feelings and so forth. In this case, I mean, the case of validation still applies. And that's also I would say, beauty of being in the crypto industry, is that in other places where they're going to, such as, e-commerce, like classic e-commerce at, big companies, like let's just say Nike, Amazon, again, like I said, they're going to be resistant to things that they're not sure about. The appetite for risk is very low in most other companies. And in crypto, it's sort of like, what's the worst that could happen? We're already in a winter, and let's just try certain things. And, if it works, great. We have our own validation of our own hypotheses and we're able to move forward. And I think the case of crypto is very important to remember that it's better to just keep doing something versus being paralyzed with either fear or uncertainty. And so that was definitely a shift that I had to make in my mind. Luckily for me, personally, that is in line with who I am, as my personality. But I can imagine that, and I have seen actually on my team, for example, in other data teams that I've been a part of, that some data scientists especially are hesitant, because that is counter in a lot of ways to the normal practice of data science, right? But yeah, it is actually very interesting. And so you kind of have to go on blind faith in some cases, but the environment is very open to that, which is great.
Yeah, seems like as you share your experience, that's kind of like a very interesting transitions. And that ties in the next questions, because you mentioned that your experience is transitioning from the Web 2 to Web 3. So how did you initially understand the skills required for a Web 3 data analyst? Roles aligned with the actual need. Can you share some of your experience about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think there was a lot of expectations. Actually, there was a lot of alignment rather between my expectations and reality. If anything, my experience when I moved to Web3, and my first experience was with Coinbase, it surpassed actually the expectations in terms of what I was able to bring to the table. Even though, like I said, I was very new to, I was quite new to crypto. And so at Uber, I was one of something like 10,000 employees, which is massive. I was a very small cog in a massive machine. And this isn't to say that I didn't have any impact at Uber, but every crypto company I've encountered has to stay lean to weather the storm of volatile market conditions. This applies to Coinbase. It also applies to MoonPay. It applies to everyone that I've talked to who works in the industry. So I was surprised, with how much influence I was able to have almost immediately within a crypto company. And it is actually part of the reason why I enjoy staying in this industry. And so that's all to say that my skills in and of themselves didn't really need to change between Web 2 and Web 3. But being at a crypto company really gives you a lot more space, opportunity, and and a lot of ownership than being in other companies, which is honestly, it's not for everybody. It can be a bit scary, but in my case, it was ultimately very rewarding on many levels.
Okay. So you mentioned about less kind of like change, and also for working in a crypto company, they offer you more opportunities, or you say like ownership. So can you give me like an example, like what's the difference, or what's what they give you those new experience compared to the traditional company that you work for?
Yeah, so it goes back to what I was saying about risk as well, right? Just naturally, those who are in the crypto industry are more open to risk, mainly because, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, crypto is risky. Not only the industry, but even on a personal level, when you invest and et cetera, that tends to be the case, right? So in any case, that's definitely one of the factors. And the other one is that, yeah, structurally, most companies that I've encountered in the crypto space, including MoonPay, again, including Coinbase, until they went public, I would say, you have to be as lean as possible. There is no growth at all costs sort of model within the business, because you absolutely cannot do that. We do not know when the next winter is going to start. We are optimistic about perhaps never again, right? We're crossing our fingers for that, but it is very possible that that can come up very soon. And if you have a very large organization at your company that cannot, maintain their business throughout a winter, then you are going to have to, you're going to have to make some moves that are not super great, and also, for your company, for people personally, and of course, for the industry overall. So I think a lot of it has to do with people being in one position at a company, and they're the only ones taking care of those areas. So as an example, at Coinbase, when I was brought on to do marketing science, I was the only marketing scientist at Coinbase until 2021. So for 2 whole years, I was the only one, mainly because, yeah, there was no ability to hire for anyone else. We were trying to keep as lean as possible. And so that was very rewarding. And that was also a reason why I was able to, kind of lead in a way, even though my title and level didn't necessarily indicate that I was leading. And that made the transition to my position at MoonPay as a director very easy, because, essentially I was directing the area already when I was at Coinbase. And this was not possible at a company like Uber, as an example, as a counterexample, again, where there's thousands of people and where you're one of several, analysts or data scientists or what have you, that are, working at that organization.
Yeah, such quite a big difference. And also, as you see, it's like kind of like lean. And also, even though you don't have this like very solid responsibility that you work at Uber, but still make a fundamental like skill set so that you can become what you are now, who you are now. So let's talk to the next question. Can you describe a typical day in the life of a Web3 director of data? And we are just curious about how is your day usually structured?
Sure. Yeah, I'm notoriously bad for having an actual routine. I've been trying to establish a routine well, I'm almost 40 years old, so 40 years basically. And I have not been really that successful at doing so, but I do aspire, to hack my day to make it as efficient and productive as possible. And of course, and nowadays when I'm leading a team and, a leader at the company and also just a leader in general, I do make a concerted effort to not overload my workload. I am, the example of what good looks like for my team and amongst others at MoonPay. And I am not in the business, of making sure that everybody is, burning out by any means whatsoever. So I am very conscious of the balance between work and life. I'm also, of course, based in Europe, in which, work-life balance is very much part of the culture. So I try to make sure that those things are top of mind as I go to organize my day. But in any case, I don't tend to structure my days so much, but I do try to divide my week into prioritized focus areas. So for example, and this changes from week to week. So for example, this week I'm trying to read up on new technologies and methodologies. I'll spend about 25% of my time doing that. I have 50% of my time devoted to, for example, strategy and planning and so forth. So those are just some examples of how I divide my focus areas. And I like having focus areas because you don't end up being too prescriptive about what you're doing per day, right? If you were to say, oh, I'm going to do this one task, you end up having, focusing so much on that one task and forgetting about exactly what you're trying to do on the big picture level. So I really try to understand, and I recommend this to everyone here as well as to my team, to do the same. And it also allows you to break away from sunk cost fallacy sometimes, right? When you're working on something really hard and you go down a rabbit hole, which is very common in data for sure. You start an analysis and all of a sudden you're, 40 graphs deep and 40 levels deep into the data, and then you forget exactly why you're doing this analysis. And so that's again a reason why I try to do focus areas. I always try to reserve about 50% of my week for urgent matters, such as, fires that come up, incidents, any escalations, and of course for meetings and general duties. And of course, part of my job as a leader is to establish good working relationships with other people in my team, which takes a lot of time and effort. And I think this is also part of the problem, it's not a problem, but it's part of the hardest part of being a manager, right? And that you don't really read about, or that you can't really learn as an individual contributor, is that the relationships are pretty much your job and you need to prioritize your people. So in the earlier part of my career, I remember I generally disliked having these sorts of meetings. I was sort of like, okay, this is my waste of my time. I could be spending this on doing actual work, for example, quote unquote, actual work. But now I make sure that I set up any meetings I have with a lot of explicit intent and purpose, so that anyone coming to a meeting with me, ideally, sometimes I get a little lazy, I'm not going to lie, but, I'm still human after all, but I try to make as much effort as possible to make clear, hey, I'm meeting with you because of this, and this is what I want to talk about. And so the person can get prepared, and we can also understand and, each other as to what both of our motivations are. So, my calendar and days can be pretty chaotic, I think, and it can seem that way to others, but it works well for me. I read a lot of books on how one should organize their time and energy, like the thing that successful people do before 5 a.m. or something like that. But what I've discovered that doesn't work for me, and it's definitely not a one size fits all. And the more that people try to claim that it is a one size fits all, they're basically lying to you. So my recommendation for everybody is just be constantly self-reflective. I think if something's working for you, cool. Don't fix what ain't broke. But if it's not working, then there's an opportunity to understand, okay, is there a way that I can optimize this for me, and be conscious about those sorts of choices. And that's how I try to approach my days and my weeks, and just my organization of my time in general.
I'm pretty sure that that's like, we don't have to, like you don't need to structure your days. I think that's pretty interesting, because I'm kind of like opposite to you. I need to structure my day. So I'm just curious about how does your day like. And That's another interesting way because now you seems you are in a like management level. So, and as you mentioned before, like there is a lot of risk in the Web3 industry. So I'm just wondering, is that kind of like the main characteristic when you hire a team member, like someone who need to can embrace the risk? Is that kind of like the main things that you're looking for and so that they can work with you?
Yeah, I would say that it's not necessarily about risk per se, but I would say we definitely look for openness and proactivity. So there's also a difference between, risk seeking. We're not necessarily risk seeking, but we are open to, thinking outside of the box, if you will. Not to use a cliche, but that is exactly what it is. And problem solving is, I would say, the biggest thing that I'm looking for. Are you able to understand problems, articulate them in order to solve them? And this is counter to problem solution first thinking, right? Solution oriented thinking. A lot of the time, especially in startups and crypto, and we see this in crypto all the time and just startups in general, right? Is that everyone has an idea. But those ideas, not every idea is created equal. Let's just be completely honest with ourselves. And part of it is because sometimes an idea doesn't solve any problem that anyone has. And there's a sweet spot, which is quite unfortunate, right? Let's think about the iPhone. When the iPhone came out, everyone was sort of like, who needs this? This is dumb. And now look at us, we're like 10 to 15 years later, everyone's more than into an iPhone or smartphones, etc. And that is an outlying example, though, of how there is a solution for something that people don't know about. In the vast majority of cases, I need people to understand, okay, what are our problems today? On multiple levels. So from the micro level, such as, okay, this piece of code doesn't work. How do I fix this? To the macro level of what are the business things that we're trying to solve, or what are the societal problems we're trying to solve, right? And the mindset of being able to articulate that and distill that down into solutions, whether that's data oriented or otherwise, is very much a quality that I look for when I go to hire.
Okay, that's a good point because I know that most of the audience today, they are doing the situation that they are trying to find like you before, like they are kind of like finding a job and from the Web2 and Web3. So that I'm just curious about this kind of person that you are looking for. And thank you for sharing your opinion. So let's move on to the next one. So back to focus on the rule that you have today. So I'm just curious about drawing on your experience at MoonPay. So what are the most crucial goals and success metrics for a director of data in the Web3 space?
Sure, yeah. So it's not exclusive to the Web3 space. I would say the measurement of the effectiveness of data and data teams, including myself as its leader within any company, Web2 or Web3 or what have you, is notoriously difficult because the impact of much of data work is either for enabling or is enabled by other teams such as product and engineering. So it's hard to articulate a lot of the time. However, actually, so that's background for why I hesitated for quite a long time, if I'm being completely honest, on settling on concrete, very ambitious goals for me and my team, because there's an idea of like, oh, can we do that? Can we actually measure ourselves in the same way that product does or that sales does? And while it's not necessarily the same, there are ways to make sure that you're still holding yourself accountable. So I would say that is one of the critical, I don't know if it's a goal per se, but it's definitely a critical factor in the success of being a data director, is to not be afraid. And it doesn't actually apply to necessarily being a director. It can apply at any level, is not being afraid to hold yourself accountable, right? It can be scary to say, okay, I'm going to shoulder that responsibility. And even if it's for me only, I mean, it's like kind of going to the gym, right? You going to the gym is not going to help anyone else. However, it is really much going to help you, but you have to hold yourself accountable. And that's exactly the sort of same mechanism that we have when we're setting goals within the business, especially on a data team, is that it can be easy to make an excuse and say, oh, you know what, we don't directly affect the business, so therefore, I'm not going to set goals that are related to the business in that way. But again, you're doing yourself very much a disservice. You're doing your team a disservice by saying that, because you are well within your power. And again, going back to especially being in a crypto company where the lines between verticals, between departments, between functionalities, between disciplines, they're all a lot more blurry than at traditional companies. And you should lean into that and make sure that you are, using those blurred lines to create yourself opportunities as well as your team opportunities to do the best work that they can possibly do, and not limit themselves necessarily to, oh, I'm a data analyst and therefore this is the only thing I do. It's sort of like, no, you can be a product manager as well. You can help the product manager. You can help finance. You can do everything. And that's the beauty of data, right? Data is knowledge and information at the end of the day. And that information and knowledge can come in many forms. And therefore you don't have to limit yourself to, oh, okay, well, I'm only doing this today. You can be like, okay, today I do this, but tomorrow I do this other thing. So as a director of data, I need to make sure that my team and I are helping the business understand what success metrics are, and that we're measuring our progress towards those metrics and successes. And we also need to adopt those metrics for ourselves. So, for example, when the company's goal is to reach X amount of revenue or grow the number of transacting users by Y%, then those are also my goals. Those are also my team's goals, and so forth. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially within Web3, to start thinking about your discipline as a means towards an end. It is not the end in and of itself, like I was saying. And it's really great to think about, and it's allows you to stop pigeonholing anyone, yourself or your team. And simply think of it data as at least I do this, I simply think of data as the catalyzing area of expertise, and we're all moving the business forward however we need to.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like you as a as a manager. So, and I also wondering like about what strategies have you found is the most effective way of communicating with all your members, especially to help them to solidate their goals? Or did you have any specific methods helping you to negotiate or communicate with your team member?
Yeah, so so at MoonPay, we are a fully distributed, remotely distributed company. We do have what we call moon bases in mostly around Europe. For example, London's our biggest moon base. We have one in Amsterdam now, Barcelona, Lisbon, etc. So us being mostly remote, it means that communication has to be very intentful. But that also means that we have a culture at MoonPay of having a lot of documentation, and we do a lot of we do a lot of writing, within Slack, within Google Drive, and documentation and documents itself, and spreadsheets, etc. And so a lot of the time I have a very heavy hand within the planning process. So I have 5 managers who work under me, and we work really closely together to make sure that the goals are clear and that everyone is on board. But I do have an expectation from the rest of my team, and I make this clear to them. And, we have team meetings in which I basically help everyone understand exactly where I want them to go, and I direct them I direct the team in a sense. Literally, I suppose, in that case, but that is the way that I tend to evangelize these sort of principles. And of course it takes practice, right? So I've been at MoonPay for almost 3 years now, and it's taking us, every quarter, which is our planning cycle, to get better every single time with what are our goals, how are they more concrete, and so forth. So I would say that a lot of it is also me leaving a lot of space for them to practice. I try to be less prescriptive and more guidance, give more guidance. I don't want to do the work for them, right? And that is not the point at all. And of course, that in that case, no one would learn if I were to do everything. And of course, that's a very, I would say, poor way of management. But that's, that's my own opinion, my own experience. But yeah, so it's basically through various media that I try to communicate with the team. And, cause some things work some methods work better for others. And some prefer reading, some prefer interaction, etc. And reading your team is actually very important to understand, okay, who needs what type of methodology to make sure that they understand the concept and that they can feel comfortable, bringing it forward on their own.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think because now most of the job in Web3 can be remote based. So that's why I think the communication is the key to let you and also the coworkers, make sure that everyone's on the same page. So yeah, so I agree with you. And now considering that your kind of diverse experience across different companies, as you mentioned. So I'm wondering, so what's aspects of your work as a data director in a Web3 space are the most rewarding for you? And is it like a technical challenges or the impact on the business or the opportunities to work with this, the cutting edge technology or something else? We want to know more about this point.
Yeah, for sure. I think, this goes back again to why I even joined the tech industry in the first place, right? When I joined Uber back in, again, 2016 or 2017, I can't remember which one now. The most rewarding part about being part of Uber at that time was because it was the hot new thing, right? It was changing the world. It was changing the way we thought about taxis. It was changing about the way we thought about transportation, etc. And so now being part of Web3 and crypto, it's even bigger than that, right? We're not only changing the way people interact with each other, it is a massive paradigm shift in history. Like we're talking about like this is the new internet, right? And yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about like the metaverse or NFTs and as we know them today. But I'm talking about the possible future that we're only actually at the beginning of. We're still at the beginning of, despite the rally and despite, all that's happened in the past few years in the crypto space with the, with ETFs and so forth, getting a lot more legitimacy. There is going to be, I think, a massive democratization of multiple industries that are gatekept currently in Web 2. And they're gatekept by only a powerful few, and that includes especially for finance and art. So I think the decentralization is the concept of decentralization and democratization are very attractive to me. And actually, I would say like art was probably the reason why I joined MoonPay, because I've seen the majority of conversations around the industry, including at Coinbase, right, center around the attractiveness of crypto as a financial product. And maybe it's because I live in Europe, and maybe there's, maybe it's the social circles I run in, but in my circles, very few people are actually interested in finance itself. Of course, everyone benefits from financial freedom. Everyone likes money, but at the end of the day, financial products themselves are very specific and they garner a very specific interest. So I think the crypto industry has suffered in some sense from conformity bias because everyone, seems to align on this idea that crypto is only good or Web3 is only good for insofar as the financial freedom that it provides. And currently, I think that makes sense, right? I think that makes sense for today. However, I think that, what binds people together is culture and art. And, we all, I think here, all the listeners here and myself included, you consume so much media throughout the day, TV, movies, books, music, all those things, any pleasure that we have, they bring people together. And I think Web3 has the potential to facilitate these meaningful connections, that are separate from the machine of industry. So I don't know if anyone knows and is that familiar, but, all these things are massive industries that are controlled only by a powerful few. I think you've heard, Taylor Swift and the issue she had with her publishing company originally. She had to re-record everything. That's just a mere example. And that's from a billionaire, right? Like Taylor Swift, out of all people, is not going to worry about that. But can you imagine if you're a small musician, an indie musician, and the only way for you to make money off of your art and creation is to, basically, get signed on these massive labels that take a huge cut of your proceeds and your profits. And it's basically unfair. The same goes for paintings and visual art, which have always been, I don't know if anyone has any like art history background, but, has always been patronized by the wealthy. And as a result, even today, in order to be a successful artist, you have to be really entrenched in these exclusive wealthy circles that are completely inaccessible to the majority of people. But that shouldn't mean that people should be excluded, right? Especially if you're an artist or creator, etc. So I do think that we have yet to reach the time in which Web3 has become, is our central mode of interaction. But I think it's amazing that I get to have a hand in building this super cool new world. And I'm not a parent myself, but I imagine it's sort of like having a child and helping them develop into, a wonderful adult, essentially.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. You talk about the potential Web3 to democratize industry like the arts and finance. So is there any like very interesting projects that you are working on are related to the arts and finance, or any interesting project that you are most interested about in this space?
Yeah, so I think at MoonPay we have a lot of Web3 projects going on. So we have a Web3 agency called Other Life that does some really, really cool stuff. So last year we started a partnership with MasterCard, for example, that is essentially an NFT and Web3 on the back end. But on the front end, what it is really just user experience, right? And memberships and getting sort of access to parts of like things like the Grammy Awards and things like that, and tickets to football games, etc. And so that's just scratching the surface. And that is still, I would say, kind of like it's still not quite where we want to go to. But we are working at MoonPay on understanding how we can expand the ecosystem so that it is a lot more inclusive than ever before. And so, I mean, it's ironic that I mentioned the MasterCard one because that's almost the opposite, where it's like exclusionary to those who are on the Web3 platform, right? But it still is a sort of indication of where we can go with that, where sort of imagine having communities of, around artists. So I'm using, again, Taylor Swift as an example, even though she has an economy around her already, right? So imagine that economy sat on Web3, and that is basically, and she could have, total control over that, separate from the Ticketmasters of the world and separate from the other sort of companies that she has to deal with as an artist of that nature, and that can be applicable, I think, to sort of anyone. So a lot of it is theoretical, admittedly, but we are working on some of the entryways, in order to at MoonPay, in order to sort of like, could manifest, this idea of what Web3 could possibly be. I would say give it about 5 years, I would say, and we will definitely be in a different world than in Web3.
That's a very we can see that in the near future. And let's talk about like the future plans. And what about your individual's future plans as a Web3 data lead or anything, like personally, your future plan?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think there's, a better time. There's never been a better time to be working Web3. So I'll continue to innovate at MoonPay until we've reached the future we've envisioned, the one that I was just talking about. A stellar team, and I also want to create the best possible environment for all of them, of course, to be the best that they can be. We're also starting to explore the bridges between crypto and AI, which I think is extremely interesting, especially as a data practitioner and a data scientist. And it'll be interesting to see, exactly where those bridges are over the next couple of years. Already, of course, a lot of the exchanges, a lot of the a lot of crypto companies are creating AI agents for specifically, trading. And of course, I think Coinbase Base has the developer hub AI agent as well. And that intersection will be really, I think, will be blowing up. I remember when AI came out, when ChatGPT got really big in the last year or so. It was a kind of like, oh, this is a versus crypto. And I remember thinking at that point, why is it versus crypto? This is all kind of in parallel with each other, and they're again, now we're seeing the intersections of that. So yeah, that's basically where I see my interest going at the very least. And I will probably be at MoonPay for as long as I possibly can, as long as they'll have me, essentially.
That's a very huge and very interesting, like your future plans. And based on like your own career path. So, and as you know, that most of the audience today that we are trying and seek to find a new job in the Web3. So I want to know, like, is there any particular advice that you would like to give all the audience or individuals as a good way to make sure that they will probably have a good transition or they can find a good job in a Web3? Any advice?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm presuming that, you're already part of Mighty DAOs, so you understand what DAOs are and are in the crypto space. But nonetheless, I think, not to borrow from a Web2 company's motto, but just do it. I would say start research on, various crypto networks and tokens, listen to podcasts, keep up on, the news that's in the space, such as, on the Pomp and Unchained, et cetera. Get involved in crypto communities, such as Mighty DAO as an example. And start getting a feel for, what people are talking about, how they're talking about them. Find your tribe of like-minded folks. Like I said before, I think one of the things that we want to make sure we're focusing on is that we're solving, real problems for people. At the end of the day, I don't think we can bifurcate the technology from people. And so as long as you have this mindset of like, okay, I want to make things better either for myself or for other people or both, right? Then you will find yourself in a position where you will seek out, some of these opportunities or even build yourself. There's nothing, sort of, barring you from just sort of getting your hands dirty, having your own pet projects. And especially in the Web3 space, there's a lot that you can do already. So for example, explore the data on Dune, get your own projects up and running, and, use that as an example to apply your skills. So if you are applying to, for example, MoonPay or other crypto companies, you should only look out for these sorts of factors to understand, okay, do you know the space, and are you able to understand the nuances of on-chain analytics as an example. But yeah, just doing it. There's no value in hesitation. I'll put it that way, and especially in crypto where everything moves at light speed. So if you hesitate, it's going to be over. And so you might as well just, commit and do that. And again, going back to when we're looking for hiring for data roles at MoonPay, which there are some roles open if you want to check them out on our website at moonpay.com. You are like, your coding and technical skills are only part of the equation. A demonstration of being able to ask the right questions and create a narrative around, again, both the problem and the solution is very, very, very important. And it also doesn't require, right, any sort of technical skills, but it does require practice. So being able to look around the proverbial corner, this is also why it's important to get involved in communities, trying to understand what's coming. What are people going to be thinking about a year from now? What are people going to be worried about a year from now, and so forth? That will really help you establish yourself as someone who can, kind of bring value and not just to a company, but to, like I said, the world, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for your very insightful experience and your suggestions. So I'm sure everyone here is as amazed by your experience as I am. So now I think it's time that we will give our audience to ask Emily questions. So all the audience, if you have any questions, And please click the microphone button below and request permissions to speak, and I will approve your request. And if you have any difficulties, you can try to send us a message. And I think it's a very rare opportunity to learn more about the rule of data in the Web3 space and gain valuable insights from Emily's experience. So don't hesitate to ask the questions. So if you have any, please try to click the button on your screen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Emily. I'm Raymond. I have a question about how do you prioritize your time between strategic initiatives, operational tasks, and hands-on data analysis or problem solving?
Yeah, so I prefer to be flexible when it comes to prioritizing my time, so it can change from day to day. So it depends on what issues come up. I guess that means that I prioritize problem solving, actually, at the end of the day. But I think of my role as problem solving on different levels in the first place. So I would say problem solving is probably the overarching priority that I have. But that applies, on many, many levels. So I can be problem solving on my team, organizationally, operationally, product or strategy related as well. And so that also goes back to what I was saying about I practice problem first thinking in order to avoid spending outsized amounts of time and energy on, cool, shiny things, but that aren't, maybe that relevant in that moment. So I rank my problems I rank my problems in order of magnitude and feasibility. So I consider, for example, is this something that I can solve today, or is it like a world peace in which, I will never solve on my own? And so that goes on the bottom of the list, world peace, unfortunately, because I can't do that. But something like, this person's having an issue with is having issue with getting data from this particular API. Like, okay, cool. That's something I can do pretty much in maybe half an hour. So I'm going to put that to the top because it's an easy one that I can do. So I recommend that this is a good practice for everybody to stack rank, whether it's a problem first thinking or, in order size of, or the value of the priorities that you have. And that enables me to just kind of systematically go through that list and be able to answer them and tackle them as they come.
Thanks for your advice. Thank you.
Hi, Emily. Hi, Anthea. I'm Angel. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Okay. I want to ask, what's the basic skill were most crucial to your success, and how did you acquire or develop them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. It's necessary to have the technical skills, of course, and you need to devote time and dedication to developing your technical craft. I don't actually have any formal education in data science. My degree was actually in literature, English literature and literary theory. So it was far removed, from data. However, I was lucky during my first job to be given the opportunity to learn on the job. And it was at a digital marketing agency. And I even referred to a textbook back in the day because this was before the days, when everything was online. And I was able to immediately apply those new learnings in real projects, which was really, really valuable and really helpful for my learning. And so now there's many ways to both formal and informal education to develop your technical skills. So that would be first and foremost, my recommendation there. And that's also how I did it as well. But I had to learn this almost the hard way. The technical skills are only a small part of one's success. So I was mentioning this already before, but as you start to develop your data career further, and this actually applies to, I would say, engineering in the sense, I would say engineering in engineering roles, like classic, like software engineering roles, you do have a little bit more emphasis on the technical craft, but it is equally important to make sure that you are developing your or I don't really like to call them soft skills. I call them operational skills, presentation, communication, project management, and all of that. And so, as I said, I have a master's degree in what is essentially literary theory, and I never thought those skills would come into handy But it turns out that it's very important and it is very handy to deconstruct, the problems and solutions and of course, construct narratives around the insights or what you're doing. And those are both critical skills for success. So I firmly believe that, it is important to have a well-rounded education. I think that nowadays people emphasize, going to school for science and STEM. And while that's, I agree because like I said, those technical skills are very important. You absolutely should be rounding that out with, just other stuff and other stuff you might even enjoy more, right? So I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but myself personally, like one of my biggest hobbies is reading fiction, especially. I read about 50 books a year. And, I think that this has helped me really understand, the nuances of humanity. Again, at the same time, we forget this, but when we're in business, when we're in science, what we're trying to do is really identify and find elements of humanity. And we're trying to serve human problems, right? So I think as much as you can, and don't be afraid, to shy away from, to lean into just immersing yourself in all these things. And you can just, say it's for research. If that's totally fine. Watching that Netflix show, might seem like it's not great, but you are engaging and critically thinking ideally about, what is going on in someone's reality, and ideally that you can apply those, across the board to the solution that you're coming up with. Thanks for a good question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for the questions. And now, since we are almost about time, so to wrap this up, I think Emily, based on Emily's experience, I think she mentioned multiple good points for the rules and also for her life. So I think the most part, if I may remember correctly, is that even though Web3 is kind of full of uncertainty, but the most point is you need to be solution oriented mindset, and also you probably need to be do not afraid of getting your hands dirty. Just do it so that you probably can find your own way in the Web3 industry. So thank you for your valuable insights, Emily. And I'm very happy that all the people joined us meeting today. And if you have any key takeaways you would like to share with the audience, please feel free to do so on Twitter or on anywhere on the social media. So that's me introduce the Mighty DAO again. So Mighty DAO will continue to invite all the Web3 professionals around the world to share their career experience, challenges, and success tips in the industry. So, and these interviews will also be available on our podcast channel, Inside Web3 Careers, which can be found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you would like to listen again, feel free to do so and share the recording with your friends as well. And once again, thank you, Emily. And thank for your valuable insights. And also thank you to all the participants for joining us today. So now it's the end of our meeting, and wish you have a wonderful night and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.